For 7 years, I thought I just had a difficult mother in law. What I actually had was a hostile takeover of my father's company, wearing pearls and calling me sweetheart. Her name was Patricia Sheffield, and by the time I finally filed for divorce from her son, she had quietly planted 27 of her own people inside my father's business. 27 in accounting, in human resources, in purchasing, in management. A whole shadow company, loyal to her and not to my father, growing inside my family's business like a tumor for 7 years, while everyone I loved told me I was imagining things. My name is Marisa Alden, and I am going to tell you how a woman almost stole my father's 50-year-old company through his own daughter's marriage, and how the divorce they were so sure would break me is the exact thing that set me free to burn her entire scheme to the ground. If you have ever been told you were crazy for seeing something that turned out to be completely real, stay with me right to the end of this one. Go ahead and hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Let me take you back. My father is named Leon Alden, and he built Alden Industrial from a single rented warehouse into one of the biggest industrial supply companies in our state, 50 years of his life. I grew up in that company. I swept the warehouse floors as a kid, I did inventory in the summers, and I always believed that one day I would help my father run it because it was not just his life's work, it was our family. When I was 10 years old, my father took me through the warehouse on a Saturday, just the two of us, and he showed me a dent in a steel support beam. He told me that dent was from the very first forklift he ever bought secondhand the week he opened, when he could barely afford it and drove it badly and put a dent in his own building on the very first day. And he told me he never fixed that dent in 50 years because every time he walked past it, it reminded him where he started. That beam is still there. That company was not a business to my father. It was every early morning, every risk, every year he did not take a vacation so that his people could keep their jobs. It was the most honest thing a man ever built, and he built it so that he could hand it to someone who would love it the way he did. Hold on to that dented steel beam, because in the end, it is the whole reason for everything I did. And then, 7 years ago, I married David Sheffield. David was charming and handsome, and his mother, Patricia, was the most gracious woman I had ever met, and I thought I was marrying into a warm, welcoming family. I was not. I was marrying into a plan. Because Patricia Sheffield took one look at my father's 50-year-old company, and she did not see a family. She saw a target. I should have seen it at the rehearsal dinner, if I am honest. Patricia gave a toast that night, and everyone said how lovely it was. And I remember thinking it was a little strange, because she talked more about my father's company than about David or me. She talked about Alden Industrial, about what a legacy it was, about how families are strongest when they build something together. She raised her glass to my father's business almost as often as she raised it to our marriage. At the time, I thought she was just being generous, trying to make my father feel included. Now I understand that at my own rehearsal dinner, Patricia Sheffield was already toasting the things she had come to take. She was not welcoming me into her family. She was measuring the doorway I had just become. But I did not know that yet. I was 25, and I was in love, and I had a mother-in-law who baked me cookies and remembered my favorite flowers and told everyone how lucky David was to have me. I want you to hold on to how kind she seemed, because that kindness was not a mask over the plan. The kindness was the plan. A woman who is going to rob you slowly for 7 years cannot afford to have you dislike her on day one. She needs you comfortable. She needs you trusting. She needs you to hand her the keys with a smile and to feel silly later, forever suspecting the nicest woman you know. It started so slowly that I did not even see it as it happened. After the wedding, my father, wanting to welcome his new son-in-law, gave David a management position at Alden Industrial. And David was good at the part that shows, the handshakes, the lunches, the presentations, so he rose quickly, and my father trusted him. And that is when Patricia went to work. She was always so helpful. Whenever there was an opening at the company, Patricia knew someone perfect for it. A nephew who needed a chance in purchasing, a dear friend's daughter who would be just wonderful in accounting, a former colleague who would be a real asset in human resources. And David, the trusted son-in-law, would bring them in, one at a time, over years. And my father, busy running a huge company and happy to see his son-in-law taking initiative, signed off on all of it. Let me show you how just one of them happened, because once you see one, you see all 27. There was a man named Curtis, Patricia's nephew. Nice enough, useless at everything, the kind of man who has failed at 4 careers and blamed the economy for all of them. And one Sunday dinner, Patricia mentioned, so casually, that poor Curtis was between opportunities again, and that it was such a shame because he had such a head for logistics, if only someone would give him a chance. And she looked at David when she said it. And 2 weeks later, Curtis was the new assistant purchasing manager at Alden Industrial. My father did not even interview him. David brought him in, vouched for him, and my father, trusting his son in law, signed the offer. That is all it took. One Sunday dinner, one such a shame, and Patricia had her own blood sitting inside the department that controls every dollar the company spends. And that is where the kickbacks would live, years later. The friend's daughter in accounting came the same way. The former colleague in human resources came the same way. And once you have your own person running the hiring, the other 24 become almost easy. Because now Patricia was not just suggesting people, she had a woman on the inside making sure her people got the interviews and the offers. It was a machine, a patient, smiling, 7-year machine. And every part of it was installed at a family dinner over dessert while I sat right there and thought I was watching my mother in law be generous. 27 hires over 7 years, spread across every critical department, and every single one of them owed their job and their loyalty not to my father, to Patricia. And here is the part that still makes me cold. While Patricia was building her secret army inside my father's company, she was making very sure that I stayed as far away from it as possible, because I was the one person who might notice. I was Leon Alden's daughter, I knew that business in my bones, and I was the real threat to her plan. And the thing that made it hurt the most is that I was good at that business. I had grown up in it, I had a finance degree, and before I married David, I had spent 3 years working in operations at another company, and I was good at it better than David ever was at the parts that actually matter. I once caught a pricing error in one of Alden's supplier contracts at a family barbecue, just glancing at a page over my father's shoulder that would have cost the company $60,000 a year, and my father laughed and said I had his eye for it. So I was not some naive girl who wandered into a boardroom. I was the owner's daughter, trained, capable, and paying attention, and that is exactly why Patricia could not allow me anywhere near the operation. So she handled me the way she handled everything, with a smile. Whenever I talked about wanting to take a real role in the company, she would touch my arm and say, "Oh, sweetheart, you focus on your marriage and your future family. Let David and me worry about the business. Your father works so hard. The last thing he needs is more people in his ear." And David backed her up. Every time I proposed taking a real role, there was a reason it was not the right time. The company was too busy, my father was too stressed. It would look like nepotism, which is a rich thing to say from a woman who was busy hiring her entire address book. They did not keep me out of that company because I could not handle it. They kept me out because I could, and because the one thing that 7-year plan could not survive was Leon Alden's daughter looking closely at the books. So they made sure I never got the chance. And slowly, gently, lovingly, they walled me off from my own family's company. And when I started to notice things, that was when it got ugly in a quiet way. Because I did notice things. I noticed that a strange number of the new employees seemed to know Patricia socially. I noticed money moving in ways that did not make sense when I glimpsed a report. I noticed that the people around my father were slowly all becoming Patricia's people. And every single time I said something, to David, to Patricia, even to my own father, the answer was the same. Marisa, you are being paranoid. Marisa, you are imagining things. Marisa, why do you have to make everything into a conspiracy? The first real thing I found by accident about 3 years in. I was at the office to bring my father lunch, and while I waited, I glanced at a vendor statement sitting on a desk, and a number on it was simply wrong. We were paying almost double what that supplier charged everyone else, and I knew it because I had negotiated with that exact supplier at my old job. I printed it out. I actually printed it out, and I brought it to David that night, proud of myself, thinking I had caught a mistake that would save the company money. And David looked at it for about 4 seconds, and then he smiled and set it down and said, "Honey, that is a volume pricing tier. You would not understand how our contracts are structured. You would not understand." And he said it so warmly, so patiently, that I felt embarrassed for even bringing it up. It was not a volume pricing tier. I know that now. It was one of the very first kickbacks, 3 years before Harold Beck ever put it in a binder, and I held the proof of it in my own 2 hands, and my own husband smiled at me until I put it down and apologized. That is how good they were. I caught them, red-handed, 3 years early, and they made me say sorry for it. There was one night I brought it to my father directly. I had noticed that almost everyone at David's birthday party from the company was someone Patricia had gotten hired, and it unsettled me, and I could not let it go. So I went to my father privately and I said, "Dad, have you ever noticed how many of the new people came in through David and his mother?" And before my father could even answer, David was there with his arm around me, laughing, saying, "Oh, here we go. Marisa has a new theory." And Patricia was right behind him, touching my father's shoulder, saying, "She has been under so much stress lately, Leon. I am a little worried about her." And I watched my own father look at me with concern instead of curiosity. Not, what did you see? But are you okay, sweetheart? You seem tense. And that is how it works. They did not argue with my facts. They never argued with my facts because my facts were correct. They just very gently made me the problem. They turned every observation I made into a symptom. And after enough dinners where the whole room looked at me with soft, worried eyes every time I noticed something true, I started to wonder if maybe I really was the crazy one. I started keeping my mouth shut. And a woman with her mouth shut was exactly what Patricia needed to finish the job. For years, they made me doubt my own eyes. That is the cruelest thing you can do to a person. They took the truth I could see with my own eyes and they made me believe I was crazy for seeing it. I want to pause here for 1 second. The stories like this one, where someone is told they are crazy for seeing exactly what is real, I put on perfect revenge stories first and nowhere else. If you want to be here when the next one lands, go ahead and subscribe and turn on the bell. Now, let me tell you how it all came apart. The thing that finally broke it open was not the company, it was David. 2 years ago, I found out my husband was having an affair, and in the ugliest, most fitting twist of this entire story, the woman he was having it with was one of Patricia's 27, a woman Patricia herself had planted in the company and personally introduced to my husband. I found out the way you always find out, which is by accident and all at once. It was a hotel receipt in a jacket I was taking to the dry cleaner, and then, once I knew what to look for, it was everywhere. Months of it. Hiding in plain sight the same way the 27 had been hiding in plain sight. Her name was Renata, and she worked in the accounting department, and she had been hired 8 months earlier on the recommendation of course, Patricia. I remember sitting in my car in the dry cleaner parking lot, holding that receipt and feeling something strange. Because underneath the pain, which was very real, there was something else, something clarifying, like the first clear morning after a long fog, because I finally understood that it was all one thing. The affair was not separate from the company. It was part of the company. Patricia had planted a woman in accounting and pointed her straight at my husband, because a husband in love with someone new is a husband who will divorce the inconvenient daughter without a fight and clear the last obstacle out of Patricia's way. I was not just losing my marriage, I was being removed from a board, like a piece that had finally served its purpose. And the moment I saw that, really saw it, was the moment I stopped being their victim and started being their problem. I did not scream. I went home to the empty house and I sat down on the edge of the bed, and I finally let myself feel all of it. And I cried in a way I had not let myself cry in 7 years. Not just for the affair, I cried because I had spent 7 years being told I was crazy. And now I knew, with total certainty, that I had been right the whole time. I cried for the young woman who married into that family with her heart wide open and got used as a doorway. I cried because they had taken my love for my father, the purest thing in me, and they had turned it into the weapon they were using to steal everything he built. And I cried because I had let them. For 7 years, to keep the peace, to be a good wife, to not make waves, I had swallowed what I knew, and while I was busy being agreeable, Patricia had been quietly taking over my father's life's work. I cried until I was empty. And then something in me went very still. Because when I lifted my head, I was not scared anymore and I was not confused anymore, and for the first time in 7 years, I was not doubting myself. I knew exactly what I had seen. And I want to say this to anyone out there who has ever been made to feel crazy for seeing the truth. Trust your eyes. The people who work the hardest to convince you that you are imagining things are almost always the people who most need you to stop looking. Patricia had spent 7 years telling me I was paranoid, and she had done it because she was terrified of the one thing I was finally about to do. Look, and the divorce, the thing they thought would finally get rid of me, did the opposite. It cut every string they had on me. I was no longer the wife who had to keep the peace. I was no longer the daughter-in-law who had to be gracious. I was just Leon Alden's daughter, free, furious, and finally allowed to open my eyes all the way. A woman in pearls had looked at 50 years of my father's mornings, at the dented steel beam and the man who put it there, and seen nothing but something to take. That is the thing I could not forgive. Not what she did to me, what she was going to do to him. That is what got me up off that bedroom floor. Not revenge for myself, protection for my father. So I did not beg David to stay, and I did not warn anyone what I had seen. I filed for divorce. Patricia came to see me once during the divorce. She sat in my living room with her perfect posture and her pearls, and she was not gracious anymore because there was no longer any reason to be, and that was the first honest conversation we ever had. She told me it would be best for everyone if I just signed the papers quickly and quietly and moved on with my life. She told me that David would be generous, that there was no reason to make things ugly, that I was still young and I could start over somewhere new. Somewhere new, she wanted me gone. Not just divorced, gone, out of the city, out of the picture, far away from my father and his company. And she was so close to getting exactly that, and she knew it, and she could not quite keep the satisfaction off her face. And I looked at the woman who had spent 7 years making me feel insane, sitting in my living room telling me to disappear quietly, and I smiled at her. And I told her that, of course, I just wanted this to be over as much as she did. And she believed me. That was her last mistake, because she stood up and hugged me goodbye, satisfied that the inconvenient daughter was finally handling herself, and she walked out of my house with absolutely no idea that I had already met with a forensic accountant the week before, and that her 7 year plan was already, very quietly, beginning to die. I did not go to my father first because I knew Patricia had spent 7 years painting me as the paranoid one, and if I walked in with a wild story, David and Patricia would just smile and tell him his heartbroken daughter was imagining things again. I needed proof he could not wave away. So I hired a forensic accountant, a quiet, brilliant man named Harold Beck, and I gave him everything I had access to as a member of the family, and I told him to follow the money and the people. Harold Beck was a small, quiet man who had spent 30 years finding money that people did not want found, and he did not get excited about anything, which is exactly why I trusted him. The first time we met, I told him the whole story, 7 years of it, and I braced myself for the look, the one I had been getting for years, the poor, stressed woman look. He did not give me that look. He listened and he took notes, and at the end, he said only one thing. He said, "If even half of what you are describing is real, this is one of the most organized internal frauds I have seen in a decade, and organized fraud always leaves a trail because organized people keep records. Let us go find them." And over 3 months, while my divorce moved through the courts, Harold Beck found all of it. Every couple of weeks, he would call me in that flat, quiet voice and tell me another piece. "Marissa, the nephew in purchasing has been approving payments to a vendor that did not exist 18 months ago. Marissa, the woman in accounting, has been coding certain invoices in a way that only makes sense if she is hiding them. Marisa, I have now connected 19 of these employees to your mother-in-law, and I have 8 more that I am close on. Every phone call, another name, another number, another proof that I had not imagined a single thing." And I would hang up the phone, and I would sit in the quiet, and I would feel 7 years of doubt lift off of me one call at a time. I was not crazy. I had never been crazy. I had just been early. He mapped the 27 employees and he connected almost every one of them back to Patricia, by blood, by friendship, by a paper trail of favors. He found the kickbacks in purchasing, where Patricia's nephew was buying supplies from vendors that quietly paid Patricia's people on the side. He found the invoices in accounting approved for work that was never done. He found the plan itself, plain as day once you stopped being told not to look. Patricia's network controlled hiring, spending, and records. The moment my father retired or died, David, the trusted son-in-law executive, would step up, and a company staffed top to bottom with people loyal to Patricia would hand him total control, and my father's 50-year legacy and my inheritance would quietly become theirs. It was a beautiful, patient, 7 year robbery, and Harold Beck put every single piece of it into one binder. I did not sleep the night before I gave that binder to my father, because there was a real chance it would not work. My father was 70 years old, and he loved David like a son. And he had spent 7 years being told by the people closest to him that his daughter saw conspiracies everywhere. There was a version of that Sunday morning where he read the binder and then looked at me the way he had looked at me at David's birthday party, with worry instead of belief, and chose the comfortable lie one more time. And if he did that, I would lose him, and I would lose the company, and Patricia would win everything. I lay awake, and I made my peace with that risk, because I had decided something on the floor of that empty bedroom. I was done shrinking myself to keep other people comfortable, even my own father. If he chose not to see it, that would be his choice, and I would grieve it, and I would still walk away whole, because I finally knew what I knew. But I hoped. God, I hoped he would see me. And in the morning, I put on a pot of coffee, and I set the binder on his kitchen table, and I found out what kind of man my father really was. I watched a strong, proud 70-year-old man read the truth about the people he had trusted, page by page, and I watched his face change, and it was one of the hardest things I have ever done. He did not call me paranoid. He read every page, and when he finished, he was quiet for a very long time. And then he looked at me, and he said the words I had waited 7 years to hear. He said, "Marisa, I am so sorry. You told me. You told me for years, and I let them tell me you were imagining it. Can you ever forgive me?" And I said, Dad, I am not here for an apology. I am here to help you take back your company. And I watched 50 years of steel come back into my father's spine. What we did next, we did the way Patricia had never once done anything, all at once and in the open. My father called his real attorney and his longtime security chief, the ones who had been there before Patricia's people ever arrived, and together with Harold Beck, we planned one single morning. And on a Tuesday, before the doors even opened, it happened. All 27 of Patricia's planted employees were terminated for cause at the same time, with the fraud evidence attached to every file. Their access badges were deactivated before they arrived. Their computer accounts were locked. And one by one, as they showed up for work believing they were part of an unstoppable 7-year plan, they were met at the door, handed a letter, and escorted off the property by security, while a full forensic audit was already underway on every account they had ever touched. I stood in that lobby that morning and I watched it happen, and I will not pretend it was not one of the most satisfying mornings of my life. Curtis, the nephew, arrived with his coffee and his usual entitled slouch, and his badge did not work, and he stood there jabbing it at the reader, confused, until security handed him his letter, and I watched the confidence drain out of a man who had spent 2 years spending money that was not his. The woman from accounting cried and said there had to be a mistake, and there was no mistake. There was just a paper trail she never knew we had. One by one, all morning, Patricia's 7-year army walked in expecting to own the place, and walked back out with a letter and an escort, and not one of them could do a single thing about it, because you cannot argue with a badge that has already been turned off, and David was in that group. My husband, soon to be ex-husband, the golden son-in-law, was walked out of Alden Industrial between two security guards, past 50 years of my father's life that he had tried to steal, and he did not say a word, because there is nothing left to say when the binder is already on the table. The whole time, my father stood next to me, straight-backed and silent, watching the people who had made a fool of him for 7 years be carried out of his life's work. He did not gloat, he just watched. And at one point, he put his hand on my shoulder, and he did not say anything, and he did not have to. 27 people. One morning, a 7-year robbery undone before lunch, and Patricia. Patricia did not go quietly, of course. She called my father and she called me, and she went from gracious to vicious in about one phone call, threatening lawsuits, screaming that we were destroying her family, that this was slander, that we could not prove anything. But we could prove everything, because Harold Beck had spent 3 months proving it while she was busy being sure I was too heartbroken to look. The kickbacks and the fake invoices were not just grounds for firing, they were crimes. My father turned the entire forensic file over to the authorities, and Patricia's beautiful, patient scheme did not just collapse, it turned into an actual criminal investigation into her, her nephew, and several of her 27. I want to tell you about the phone call she made to me the day after the terminations, because it is the moment I had waited 7 years for without even knowing it. She was not gracious, and she was not even threatening anymore. She was frantic. And she said, Marisa, whatever you think you found, you have made a terrible mistake. You have destroyed this family. How could you do this to us? And for the first time in 7 years, I did not feel small when Patricia Sheffield spoke to me. I felt calm. And I said, Patricia, I did not find what I think I found. I found exactly what I found, and it is in a binder, and it is with the district attorney, and every single thing you spent 7 years telling me I was imagining is now a numbered exhibit. And there was a silence on that line that was worth every worried look, every soft voice, every dinner where they made me the problem. And then I said the only cruel thing I said in this entire story, and I do not regret one word of it. I said, you should have let me stay crazy, Patricia. A crazy woman nobody listens to. But you needed me gone so badly that you set me free. And a free woman who was right the whole time is the most dangerous person you will ever meet. And I hung up on her, and I never answered her call again. Let me tell you where everyone landed. David and I are divorced, and because I filed with a forensic binder proving he had participated in defrauding my father's company, and because of his affair, he walked away from that marriage with nothing, which is exactly what he had contributed. Patricia's network is gone, her nephew took a plea, and Patricia herself faced consequences that pearls and a gracious smile could not talk her out of. The forensic audit recovered a great deal of what her people had siphoned, because organized thieves, as Harold Beck promised me, keep records, and records cut both ways. Between the recovered money, the vendor settlements, and what the courts eventually clawed back, my father was made mostly whole. But the number I am proudest of is a different one. In the year after that Tuesday morning, we rehired for every one of those 27 positions, and we hired real people, careful people, people who came in through the front door and earned their jobs. And the company got stronger than it had been in a decade because it turns out a business runs a lot better when the people inside it are actually trying to help it succeed instead of quietly bleed it. And me. I finally took the place in my father's company that I was always meant to have. I run operations at Alden Industrial now, right beside my father. There was one evening a few months in when the two of us were the last people in the building, and he came into my office and sat down across from me, and he said, I spent 50 years building this so I could hand it to my family. And I almost handed it to the wrong ones. The right one was standing in front of me the whole time, telling me the truth, and I called her paranoid. I did not say anything. I just came around the desk and hugged my father, and that was worth more than every dollar Harold Beck ever recovered. I will not pretend it did not cost me anything, because it did. I lost a marriage, even a false one, and there is a grief in that. I lost the version of my mother in law I thought I had, the one who baked cookies, even though she was never real. And for a while, I lost the easy, trusting way I used to move through the world, because once you learn that the nicest woman you know spent 7 years robbing your father with a smile, you do not unlearn it. But here's what I got back. A few months after all of it, I walked through the warehouse on a Saturday alone, the way my father used to walk me through it when I was 10. And I stopped at that dented steel beam, the one from the first forklift, the one he never fixed, and I put my hand on it, and I thought about how close a woman in pearls came to owning it, and how she never will, not one bolt of it, for as long as I am alive. And I understood that the fog was really gone. I was not the paranoid one. I was the one who had been watching the whole time. And now I was the one standing guard. My father tells everyone now that his daughter saved his company. He is not entirely right. I did not just save his company. I saved myself, because for 7 years I let people I loved convince me that the truth I could see was a sickness in my own head, and the day I stopped believing them was the day I got my whole life back. So here is what I need you to hear. If there is a Patricia in your life right now, if someone is working very, very hard to convince you that you are imagining things, ask yourself one simple question. What would they lose if you turned out to be right? Because the answer to that question is almost always the whole reason they need you to think you are crazy. Trust your eyes. Look anyway. And when you finally get free of the people who needed you blind, open them all the way. If this story meant something to you, please take a second to like it and to share it with someone who has been told they were crazy for seeing the truth, because they need to hear this today. And subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell, because we tell one of these stories about quiet people finding their strength every single time. Tell me in the comments about a time you were right all along and they told you that you were imagining it, and I will see you in the next one.